Hi again, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com, and welcome to another episode of Ask the Lawyer. So today, we're going to ask the lawyer about car accident cases and how they decide which ones to take and which ones to not take and how all that works out. Our expert today is Michael Greenspan. He's an attorney, has offices in White Plains, New York, and in the Bronx. Mike, thank you for being here today. I appreciate your time.
Great to be here.
So let's talk in general. Somebody contacts you, whether they call your office or through the internet, they drop by. What can they expect when they first contact your office? They've been in an accident and you're the first person they contact.
Well, my goal is to put their mind at ease. That is probably the most important thing that I can do because, look, when you've been involved in a car crash, you're scared, you're upset, you've got a stack full of bills, you don't know who's going to pay them, you may not be able to work. How is that going to get taken care of? And you can even have insurance companies contacting you by the phone or even in person. And now you need help, and we're going to be the ones there to help you.
So what is something in general people should know about insurance companies when they're in an accident, especially if it involves injury and serious injury? What do we need to know about insurance companies?
Well, there's a lot in New York. And first of all, you have to understand that the insurance company is just not your friend. They may say they want to help you, but really the insurance company is looking out for the company's own interests, not yours. So it's important to have a lawyer to sit down and explain how those medical bills are going to get paid, how the lost wages that are caused by this crash are going to get taken care of and by how much, and what to do to make sure that you're protected when the insurance company contacts you.
And so the insurance company, their goal is to pay you as little as possible.
Unfortunately, that's what it is. They're in the business of looking after their policyholders, not their customers, and certainly not the injured person.
You were telling me before we started something about runners in New York, and it's a problem. Explain what that is and tell us what's being done about that.
Yeah, what is happening is somebody gets involved in a car crash. They're taken to a hospital and then they're released. And then soon after, they'll get a phone call from someone saying, I heard you were in a car accident. We can help you. We'll get you a lawyer. Won't cost you anything. We'll get you a doctor. We'll even provide you with transportation to ARC staff and clinics. You want to do that, right? And what the people on the receiving end of this call don't realize is that, first of all, it's illegal to do that. But the kind of people who would contact you would not be the type that you'd want protecting your rights and your interest.
Well, how would they get that information? How would they know that someone has been in an accident and been treated?
Well, they've obtained it illegally. That's the only way to describe it. Someone at the hospital or perhaps one of the other people who've come in contact with this injured person during the course of the incident has given that information. They've sold it to them and somehow now they've obtained it and now the person is being contacted.
Wow, so is there anything trying to be done to stop that? That's crazy.
Well, it is difficult. There are the various bar associations are trying to get law enforcement to take a more aggressive look into this, but it's a problem that is going to be ongoing and the public needs to be made aware of it. We as lawyers are not allowed to contact someone whom we know has been involved in a car crash. We have no possible pre-existing relationship. So Rob, if I heard that you were in a car crash, I couldn't call you at the hospital and say, hi, how are you? Want me to help you? Especially if I didn't know you.
I didn't even know I didn't realize that was the situation.
Yeah, that is the rule. We're absolutely prohibited from contacting an injured person within the first 30 days. And that is to protect them because, look, let's face it, if you're in a hospital bed, the last thing you want to do is get contacted by a stranger who's going to come to you, make you promises, have you sign things, probably won't even read them before signing. And before you know it, you've hired a lawyer and a whole team of people you don't know.
Who probably doesn't have your best interest in mind.
Well, that would be certainly accurate.
So let's talk about insurance coverage. How much coverage should I have to protect me if I'm in an accident? Most states have minimum coverages, right? Is that enough?
Yeah, and the problem is in New York, the minimum coverage on an auto policy for liability purposes is $25,000 per person, $50 per collision. So for example, if it's your fault and you've bought a $25.50 policy, you'll be protected up to the level of that policy. And as you can imagine, that really does not cover very much. So if you have a crash with multiple claimants, that can go well above it. And if you're the injured person and you've been struck by somebody who only has minimum policy, you need to self-insure to protect yourself. Because what happens is that $25,000, $50,000, which is the policy limits for most vehicles, for the minimum is going to put an artificial cap on your recovery, on your ability to get fair compensation for what has been done to you.
So your advice then would be to get as much as you can afford?
Absolutely. What you want to do is self-insure to the best you can and get the best coverage you can. Look, you can't possibly predict that somebody is going to be distracted or drunk or whatever and cause a crash and may only have cut rate insurance. But if you've got a good insurance broker or agent, they'll be able to tell you what the right limits are for you. And hopefully you can have enough to also have an umbrella coverage above that so that in the event that there's a catastrophe, look, an accident can happen. You can get distracted, a loud noise, a sound, a sneeze or something, and suddenly something terrible happens. You want you and your family to be protected in the case of a lawsuit. But by the same token, if you have the right coverage and you're injured in a car crash involving someone who only had minimum coverage, now you will be able to have a second area of recovery. Now, let me give you an example of how this can work. And this is where in New York, the rules can be kind of interesting. Let's assume that you're hit by a taxi cab outside of the city of New York, so basically north of Yankee Stadium. The minimum limits for a taxi outside the city of New York are $25,000, $50,000. Whereas if you were just a couple blocks down south in the Bronx, it'd be up to $100,000.
Wow.
So now let's assume, though, that you've got multiple people who are involved in that crash. So now suddenly that $25,000 per person is really illusory because you've got multiple people competing for that $25,000. And certainly they're going to need representation, but individual representation. When you've got multiple people hurt and there's minimum policy, the same lawyer can't represent them and adequately represent their interests.
So that brings us to underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage. What are the laws in New York regarding those, and what are your recommendations there?
Well, once again, you've got $25,000 is the bare minimum that'll cover you for an uninsured and underinsured motorist claim. So what you're going to want to do, and this is, you have to be very careful about it. If you have a policy that is renewing that did not have the same limits for liability and underinsured motorist coverage, you really need to sit with your agents. So let me give an illustration of how that works. Let's say you're driving along and somebody crashes into you through no fault of your own, and they only had a $25,000, $50,000 policy. Well, if you have proper coverage of your own for liability of at least $100,000, for example, and your uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage matches your liability limits, well, then at least you'll be able to get protection from your own policy in the event you can settle with that at-fault motorist. Now, the reason I said about whether you have an existing policy is the law changed last year so that now if you have a new policy in New York, your uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage must match your liability limits. For policies issued before then, it didn't. So this is an area where people can get really in trouble if they don't know and they're looking just to get the cheapest insurance possible.
Again, that's something that's you need to bring up with your insurance agent and make sure you've got the proper coverage.
Yeah, you certainly need to. And another area of coverage is under no-fault expenses, which people may not realize.
That was my next question. Explain that.
Here in New York, by law, you have to have a minimum of $50,000 in coverage to cover available medical bills, lost wages, and certain other expenses. But for very little more, literally a couple dollars and pennies, you can get that up to over $150,000 for something called additional personal injury protection, or APIP. It's something you wouldn't know about. Frankly, I didn't know about it when I got my first car insured here in New York, but I had a good insurance agent who told me, or actually didn't even discuss it with me, just got me the coverage because she knew what I needed to know with that question that I didn't even know I needed to ask. So that's why it's important you have someone you can trust who can get you the right coverage, because if you're catastrophically injured, $50,000 is not going to cover you for very much. And if you have multiple surgeries, you have to go to a rehabilitation center, you want to be able to protect yourself in the event that that happens.
Now, does the type of insurance coverage somebody has, whether if someone comes to your office and you're trying to decide whether their case is worth taking, does the type and amount of insurance they have, does that have some determination on whether you take the case?
It sure can. It really depends on the circumstances of their case. But let's use our taxi cab example again. If somebody has the misfortune of being injured by a taxi cab outside of New York and there are multiple people who have to make claims, now we have to look at it. There's that artificial cap. if they've rolled snake eyes, let's say you're an elderly person or you're a millennial, you're someone who doesn't own a car for whatever reason. So now you don't have your own coverage from your own auto policy, and perhaps you may not live with a family member who would have you covered.
Mhm.
So you're relying solely on the coverage of that taxi cab, or not even a taxi cab, that same minimally insured vehicle. So now you're competing with other people who are injured in that crash. And it doesn't matter how catastrophic your injuries are, because that insurance company will never pay above those policy limits. So that now you're going to look at a situation where you may have to fight tooth and nail, go to trial, pay experts. And the only amount that the insurance company is going to cover is that $25,000 or $50,000.
I guarantee you most people don't realize that that's the situation. Are things different when we're talking injury, serious injury, as opposed to property damage only? Is it a difference?
They are, because in New York, in order to successfully sue for injuries resulting from a car crash, you basically have to prove a couple things: liability, damages, and threshold. And let me interpret what those terms mean. Liability, you have to show that somebody else was at fault. Damages, you have to show that you sustained some sort of economic injuries as well as some physical injuries. But then you also have to show something called a serious injury. Now, some of this legislature back in the early 70s came up with 9 categories of what constitute a serious injury. Some of them are obvious and some aren't. So most of the time we get people who have some sort of a neck, back, shoulder, or knee injury. And if you look in the statute, it doesn't say if you have a neck, back, shoulder, or knee injury, that's a serious injury. So it's the job of the lawyer to take a look at what the medicals are, what the final doctor's reports are, and apply the law to see if whether that person's injuries meet the statutory definition of a serious injury. Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not. And that's where the cases can be fought over very, very tenaciously by the defense, because even if it is the defense's fault, and even if the person appears to be hurt, if a jury does not find that those injuries meet the definition of a serious injury, the person gets nothing.
Wow. So now, obviously, I can't know all that. I don't have the expertise as the person who's in the accident. If I want to talk to you, am I going to have to pay a fee up front to talk? Is there a free consultation? How's that work?
Well, the great thing about this line of work is it levels the playing field between us and the really money, the insurance companies, the big corporations, or whoever is at fault. It will cost someone nothing to give me a phone, to call me on the phone and have a consultation. It will cost them nothing to meet with me and my team in my office to go over their potential case. And even if we determine that there is a case that we can accept, because we don't accept every case, we only get paid if we win. And winning is defined as the insurance company for that at-fault vehicle is paying them for their pain, their suffering. And then we do it on a contingency fee basis. So we have a lot of motivation to make sure we have the right case and to fight as hard as we can.
That's some great information today, Mike. I really appreciate it. I know you've helped some people. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. Be well.
All right, great. My name is Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com. My guest has been Mike Greenspan, attorney in New York with offices in the Bronx and in White Plains, New York. And we hope you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can make sure you can see future episodes of Ask the Lawyers. Have a great day.